Chapter 22, Ricky Molina. I might never have figured it out if some guy named Chad didn't mess up the paint for my room. We fixed the busted window right after Hurricane Leo, but we didn't get around to repainting until that weekend. And wouldn't you know it, Home Depot read our paint sample wrong. We were supposed to get Blizzard Blue, but they gave us Buzzard Blue instead, which is a totally different color. So pretty soon we're back at Home Depot explaining the mix-up to Chad, the paint guy. He promises to swap out our order, but first he has to get his supervisor to sign off on it. He grabs the cans of Buzzard Blue and disappears through a door marked Employees Only. The yelling starts almost immediately. A foghorn voice begins shouting at poor Chad, calling him stupid and worthless and a lot of other words that would get me in trouble if I got caught saying them out loud. Maybe the shouter thinks that no one can hear him because the door is closed, but he's echoing all over Home Depot, even though the ceiling has got to be 40 feet high. Everywhere, people stop shopping to stand and listen. It's not that they're eavesdropping, there's just no escape from it. The onslaught can't be ignored. And it doesn't end, it gets worse. The employees only door opens and Chad backs out with his shoulders slumped, his face all bright red, and a second later the supervisor appears, all 6'3" of him, loud mouth still bellowing. "I could train a baboon to do this job, but not you. You cost the company money. It's going to come out of your next paycheck." And on and on. And at this point, my parents are staring in horror, and I'm ready to run over there and tell that bully that I'm fine with a Buzzard Blue room just as long as he stops yelling at that poor clerk. I actually take a couple steps forward and freeze. The 6'3" supervisor, the one destroying a young employee over 2 cans of paint, I recognize the guy. It's CJ's stepdad, Marcus. Not the joke-cracking, generous, fatherly Marcus all the guys talk about. I picture CJ dropping out of a moving car and rolling across the pavement. It didn't make any sense then, but it makes sense to me now. This is the kind of person you jump out of a car to get away from. For the others, it's almost a given that CJ lucked out in the stepfather sweepstakes because he's got all the best stuff and because Marcus is a fun guy. But it comes to me then that there's one of us who never joins in the conversation when the topic is the awesomeness of Marcus. CJ himself. And once my brain has made it that far, everything else clunks into place. CJ's always at the fort when the rest of the guys arrive, and he always finds an excuse to stay later when we leave. He's the only one of us whose clothes smell like the place. Mitchell wasn't lying when he claimed someone was in the fort when he went there last night, or that night. He just never realized that the intruder was CJ. CJ's living at the fort. Why? It's a question I never could have answered before that trip to Home Depot. But seeing Marcus tear apart a poor clerk over paint changes everything. He hides it well around CJ's friend, but the guy's got a temper. A really bad temper. And the whirlwind in my head continues, a rapid-fire slideshow of CJ's injuries, cuts, bruises, scrapes, black eyes, bandaged ribs. CJ the daredevil. Only, what if CJ isn't a daredevil at all? What if his injuries don't come from death defiers? They come from Marcus? What if the accidents, the stunts gone wrong, are 100% on purpose to cover up the wounds and marks that are too obvious? And if that's true, it's no wonder CJ never seems to appreciate the new phones and the tech and great presents he gets from his stepdad. If that's true, then Marcus's generosity comes at a very steep price. I could be wrong. I know I could be wrong. But what if I'm right? Eventually, Marcus goes back to his office and we're able to get our paint swapped. The storm is over, but Chad still looks destroyed. You don't recover so fast from an attack like that. and at least Chad is an adult. CJ's in middle school, and he has to deal with Marcus every day. It isn't hard to understand why he'd give up the comforts of home and all those great presents and go live in a hole in the ground. If I'm right, I've got to help him. But how? My first impulse is to tell this whole story to my parents. But again, what if I'm wrong? Besides, this isn't my story to tell. It's CJ's personal family business, and it's pretty obvious that he's trying to keep it private. My parents' solution could be to call the police on a guy who might turn out to be innocent. In any case, it would affect CJ and his mom in ways that it's hard to predict. It could change their whole lives, and it's not up to me to decide that for them. I ache for CJ. My family is a source of total support for me. For him, if my suspicions are correct, it's just the opposite. On top of everything else he might be going through, he must feel completely alone. And that's when I realized that CJ has a backup family. His friends. He's part of a group so tight that I'm still on the outside even after weeks of trying to fit in. They'll support him. I'm positive. I just have to see if they'll agree that he needs their help. I'd recognize Mitchell's mother anywhere. She and her son have the same face, although she's taller with long blonde hair. I'm a little surprised she isn't lying flat on the floor, passed out cold with exhaustion. That's how Mitchell describes how overworked she is. Ricky, she repeats. Funny, Mitchell's never mentioned you. Typical Mitchell. He wishes I didn't exist, so he's pretending that I don't. I'm new in town, I explained. I went to a magnet school before here. That rings a bell. Oh, the magnet boy. Yeah, now I know who you are. She turns around and calls, Mitch, your friend Ricky's here. Never heard of him. His mom smiles. Go on back. He'll be happy to see you. Yeah, right. Ecstatic. I have no trouble finding Mitchell's door. It's the one that slams shut the minute I turn the corner. I knock. I'm sick, he calls and punctuates it with a fake cough. I walk in. I don't know what I expected Mitchell's room to look like. Funhouse mirrors, maybe. But it's just a normal room, smallish and in need of a paint job. I bet I could get him a deal on 2 gallons of Buzzard Blue, only slightly used. Mitchell lies on the bed, staring at a poster of a giant 4-leaf clover. The only other decoration is a newspaper photo of a middle-aged man held to the wall with a dart right through the center of the forehead. Who's that? I ask. Dr. Breckenridge, he replies in a surly tone. Not that it's any of your business. Hey, listen, man, I begin. I know you don't want me here, but I have to talk to you about CJ. I think he's in trouble. He swings his legs over the side of the bed and sits up to face me. If this is some kind of joke. No, it's no joke. Remember the time you went to the fort in the middle of the night and some guy jumped you? As usual, he's touchier than a bear with a sore nose. Yeah, thanks so much for talking about that night, which really did happen, even though everybody says I made it up. I believe you, I tell him. That catches him off guard. The one thing he isn't prepared for is me not being the enemy. I know you were telling the truth, I go on. And that guy that attacked you, that was CJ. Why would CJ attack me? Because he didn't know it was you, I reply readily. He was probably fast asleep. I think he's been living at the fort. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, Mitchell explodes. Why would he do that? He's got the best house of any of us. The house is fine, I agree. The problem is who's living there. And I describe what I saw at Home Depot and how it might explain CJ's many accidents and injuries a whole lot better than his so-called career as a daredevil. I go through all the other clues I've seen. None of them are so important by themselves, but together they paint a convincing picture. CJ's long hours at the fort, his wrinkled clothes, and his permanent bedhead, His desperation dive out the door of Marcus's car. I don't mention the tears I saw on CJ's face the day he was called to the office at school. That kind of suffering has to stay private, even from your best friends. But Marcus gives him such amazing stuff, Mitchell argues in a subdued voice. Guilt presence, I offer, to make up for what he did. With a guy like Mitchell, you never quite know if you're getting through to him. He's listening, but is it sinking in? Especially when it's coming from me, who he distrusts so much. He's silent for a long time, and finally he asks, "Well, now what?" "I don't know how much we can help him," I say honestly. "It's complicated. Marcus is his mom's husband." "Well, we can't just do nothing," Mitchell insists. "Well, the first thing you can do is tell Evan and Jason." That was my main reason for approaching Mitchell first. All this will sound better coming from him than from me, the outsider. I take a deep breath. "And then we talk to CJ.